So this video is going to be a recommendations video, but also my mid-year series check-in. Basically, I was planning out this video when I realised that I finished 6 series so far this year, and all of them were 4 or 5 stars. Some of them are new favourite series of all time. Never when that happens. But yeah, this is going to be a recommendations video because I recommend all of these series, but also these are the series that I finished so far in the first half of the year, and July, because I was meant to film this video a little bit earlier, but I've since finished another series and I don't want to wait until the end of the year to talk about it. So all of that rambling to say, we're going to go in chronological order, starting with the first series that I finished this year, which was the Nightborn Duet by Carissa Broadbent, the first book being Serpent and the Wings of Night. This is part of the Crowns of Nyaxia world, but I'm going to count this as a completed series because I have finished the first arc of this story, and I know that the third book, when it comes out later this year, that's going to follow a different main character. This is a fantasy romance series, however, I felt like it lent more on the fantasy than the romance. It was around 60% fantasy and 40% romance, which I think is just the perfect balance for me. I felt really invested in the romantic elements, but also if you were to take those out, you still would have a really compelling plot and a really interesting world. It was pitched to me as the Hunger Games with vampires because the plot surrounds this tournament that our main character is taking part in. Our main character is called Araya, and she is the human daughter of the vampire king. And I think it's every century, they're invited to take part, like people are asked if they want to volunteer to take part in this tournament, where the winner is granted a wish by the goddess of death. So Araya signs up for this tournament because being a human in a world of vampires is pretty dangerous, and she thinks if she's able to win, then she can use this wish to secure her safety. The love interest is someone who she meets while taking part in this tournament, and I thought the tension between the two main characters was so well done. This was the perfect slow burn. It's a very dark and brutal world, so the stakes felt high, and I thought the politics as well were really interesting. There's quite a complex political situation where there's tension building between these vampire houses. Would recommend this if maybe you've struggled with romantasy or fantasy romance in the past, if maybe you've wanted a book that does have an interesting plot as well as a compelling romance. I thought this was the perfect balance. I was going to try and grab the next series that I'm going to talk about because I do own it physically, but those books are heavy and I can't be bothered to try and dig them out of the bookshelf. So I will just once again put a picture on the screen here. I should have said I read Serpent and the Wings of Night and the sequel on my Kindle, which is why I don't own physical copies. The next series that I'm going to talk about though is the Fitz and the Fool trilogy by Hobb. This is the final series within the Realm of the Elderlings world, and this series put me through so many emotions. I think because by this point in the series, you've read, how many books are actually in the Realm of the Elderlings? I always forget this. I think there's 16 books if I've counted right, but by the time you get to this point in the series, it's bringing together everything you've learned about the characters and the world and the magic, and it just felt so satisfying. There were so many satisfying moments and there were so many heartbreaking moments, so many moments of joy. I feel like I've already talked about this series so much. I actually have a full dedicated review video for this series, which I will leave linked in the cards and in the description, just in case you want fresher thoughts, because I did film that right after I'd finished the final book. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend picking up the Fitz and the Fool trilogy unless you've read the rest of the Realm of the Elderlings, but if you're looking to get into this series, I would recommend starting with Assassin's Apprentice, because that introduces you to this main character of Fitz, and the rest of the series essentially follows his life. There are alternating series where you kind of deviate from Fitz and you follow other characters, and those books develop the world more and you learn important things about the magic and things like that, but Fitz is the main character. This is essentially the story of his life. So the first trilogy follows him as he's a child right up until late adolescence. Hobb really puts her characters through it, so if you are hesitant to pick up a series that's very sad and emotional and where characters are processing their trauma, then this probably wouldn't be the series for you. It's also very slow and very character driven, so you will read pages and pages, chapters and chapters, sometimes even half a book, just seeing characters interact, or you'll see characters' thoughts, and it's great because it means that the characters feel like real people, and by the end of the series you feel like you really know them. But also I know that some people might find that a little bit boring and struggle to connect with it, so hopefully that helps to set expectations with this series. It's really difficult to summarise a 16-book series in just a few minutes, but I thought that this was so worth the investment. I like that it's broken up into smaller series as well, so you can take a break in between series and it doesn't take much effort actually to get back into the world. Robin Hobb's writing is that good that the characters are so memorable, it's easy to pick things right back up once you get back into it. Next series on my list is The Great Cities Duology by NK Jemisin, the first book being The City We Became. There was something very special about reading this book while in New York because it's set in a kind of alternative New York. Basically within this world, once cities reach a certain size, they come alive and there are human avatars walking the earth who embody these cities. Most cities usually only have one avatar, however New York has 6. One person to represent each of the different boroughs and then one person to represent New York as a whole. This doesn't have loads of plot, but essentially the plot is that these characters are realising what is going on. They're trying to connect with each other and understand what it means to be an avatar of New York. There's also a plot that's kind of underlying all of that, where New York is being threatened by an outside force. Essentially the main characters are having to come together to try and defeat this threat, and there were some intense moments. The atmosphere was incredible. I think that NK Jemisin is so good at building atmosphere. It felt almost dreamlike, but like a vibrant dream. I felt like I could picture the setting really well and I felt immersed in it. So even though there were a few moments where I was a little bit confused and I wasn't quite sure what was happening, the world and the characters pulled me through, and I think calling this a fantasy series isn't quite doing it justice. This felt like speculative fiction but with fantastical elements and also sci-fi elements. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, if you're looking for something that feels truly unique, then I would recommend this. Next on my list is the Earthseed duology by Octavia E Butler. Parable of the Sower is one of my favourite books of all time, not just this year. I loved this book and it's really difficult to explain because it's dystopian fiction. It's set in the 2020s, but this was written in the 1990s. So it was the author's projection of what she thought the future was going to look like. We follow a girl called Lauren who is 15, I think, at the start of the first book, and she lives in one of the last safe communities in California. So in this world, the world has fallen apart. The government is corrupt and there's a water shortage. Water is really expensive because of global warming, and vigilantes roam the streets. If you like TV shows like The Walking Dead or The Last of Us, not because of the zombies, because there's no zombies in this series, but if you like the commentary on human society and how people have adapted to situations, then I think this would really work for you. Lauren doesn't agree with the adults around her and their attitudes towards the situation. She thinks that they need to learn and adapt, and she starts to form her own religion and make plans to leave this community to spread the word on this religion. This world is brutal, and Lauren has something called hyperempathy, which means that she can feel other people's emotions. Obviously that's not great in this world because people are not really experiencing many happy emotions, so she is feeling other people's trauma and that kind of motivates her as well. This does have some darker elements and there are some horrific things that happen, so bear that in mind, and I would recommend checking trigger warnings as well if you need them. I listened to the audiobooks for this series and I would recommend them. This is told as a series of diary entries, so I felt like Lauren was a real person and it was just such an immersive experience. The next series I finished this year was the Atlas trilogy by Olivie Blake, the first book being the Atlas 6. I do actually have a spoiler-free reading vlog for this series, which I'll leave linked just in case you would like to check it out, because obviously that has my fresher thoughts as I was reading each book. I enjoyed this series. I was quite happy hanging out in this world with these characters, and I was happy to roll with any decisions that they made. I know that the third book doesn't have the best reviews, which might put some people off from picking up this series. I do think that the audience for this is quite niche. It's not the most satisfying ending to a series, and I can understand why some people were frustrated. I thought that this was a really interesting exploration of this group dynamic. So the book opens with 6 magicians being recruited as initiates to the Alexandrian Society. So it's set in our world, except there are magicians openly part of society. The writing feels a little bit pretentious and a little overwritten, so that did take a while to get used to. However, I felt like that added to the vibe that Olivie Blake was going for. I liked the critique on academia and the discussions around philosophy and whether knowledge should be hoarded or should be made available to all. I thought there were some really interesting ideas in this. It's really about corruption and power and how some people will pursue knowledge regardless of the consequences. The pacing is slow and there's some parts that feel a little bit tedious, but this really worked for me, and I think if you like dark academia, then it is worth picking up this series. It was a 4-star series for me, so not a new favourite, but I did enjoy every book. I would recommend reading the books quite close together because they kind of run on from each other, so it might be difficult to get back into if you do leave a bigger pause in between books. The final series that I have to talk about is the most recent series that I finished, and that is the Rook Rose trilogy by MA Carrick, the first book being The Mask of Mirrors. I loved this series so much. I don't think it's going to be for everyone, but it was my perfect type of fantasy because it's political, there's lots of intricate world building, the magic is fascinating, and the characters also I thought were really complex and well developed. The setting in which this takes place is a city that reminded me a little bit of Camor from The Lies of Loch Lamora. It's a Venetian setting, so picture lots of canals basically. This city was at some point in the past colonised by another country, and now the situation in the present day is a little bit tense because there's tension between all of the various groups of people that live in this city. We follow a main character called Ren, who is a con artist trying to infiltrate one of the noble families because she wants to secure money for her and her sister. There's also this masked vigilante who's very mysterious, but he seems to have his own agenda against these noble families. This did take me a while to get into because there's lots of characters and some of the characters have multiple names. So there is a character list right at the start of the book, which I found really helpful. I read it on my Kindle, so it was really annoying having to flick back and forth. But there's also a glossary at the back, which again I found really helpful for understanding the magic systems because there's multiple magic systems and they are quite difficult to get your head around. But one of the magic systems is to do with tarot cards and tarot readings, and then there's another that's more scientific, and that's to do with channeling powers from the gods through a focus. This also has lots of LGBTQ+ rep as well, if that's something that you're looking for. I think I would also recommend this if you're looking for a series that has very little romance or where the focus on the romance is more of a side plot rather than at the forefront. I don't think the first book has much romance at all, maybe a little bit with kind of tension building, but the romances that there were I thought were well developed. I thought the characters had great banter and good chemistry, which I think is quite difficult to do when you're not putting romance at the forefront of the story. I felt really invested in all of these characters, and I'm really sad that this series is over because it has become a new all-time favourite series for me. Honestly, I think this series is super underrated or underhyped. I hear some people talking about it, but not as many as I think should be. And yeah, if the idea of a political fantasy that combines the setting of The Lies of Loch Lamora with politics that are similar to the David trilogy, then prioritise this because I thought it was fantastic. That does bring me to the end of this video though, so thank you for watching if you made it this far. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these series and what you thought of them. Let me know how many series you've finished so far in 2024. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and click subscribe if you'd like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.